Okay, so planning and carrying out investigations for our monthly PLC. We're just kind of focusing on different practices throughout the year, and this is February's edition. We still have March and April coming up, and so stay tuned, and thank you for being here or watching afterwards. Planning and carrying out investigations kind of presents different challenges for different grade levels, and so today we're really going to be looking at how can you assess these, what does it look like in different grade bands, and what are some performance assessments, what are the verbs that we can be looking for observing students and what they're doing when they are planning and carrying out investigations. And so I'm going to kind of flip back and forth and toggle between screens, but I wanted to let you know that the next couple slides are coming from the MPress Toolkit. This is a great resource. It's mtscienceeducation.org. There's just one E between science and education, just as a note. But if you click on Toolkit, there are science and engineering practices, cross-cutting concepts, disciplinary core ideas. There's a landing page and other resources for each practice. And so when I go to planning and carrying out investigations on the landing page, it's going to bring you text from the framework for K-12 science education as published in 2012 by the National Research Council. Also gives you a Paul Anderson video and the grade level progressions. And so I usually pull various parts of this website for our, and so I can't see the chat in my screen at the same time. I have to go back and forth is what happens. And so I usually pull that for our meeting.
Chris, I'm sorry, I just added the web link on the chat.
Perfect. Thank you. And so science and engineering, planning and carrying out investigations. Really it's about observation and description. So whenever we're looking at science, we're really trying to understand or explain phenomena, and we're looking at engineering, we're really trying to pull out and define a problem and then solve it ultimately. And so on this one, we have the progressions K2 all the way up to 912. And so typically how I run this is that we kind of break it up and talk about what verbs we see in each one. I might go back to this website. It looks like it might be a little bit more clear to see. Michelle, can you confirm or deny if that's more clear?
It is more clear from the website.
Okay, and so I'll stay here with that. And I just need to see who else is here. We have 4 people, and there are 4 grade bands. And so it looks like M. Wilson and Rachel. Hi, Rachel. It's good to see you again. So we're going to kind of break things up between. And so when I'm looking at each grade band for planning and carrying out investigations, we have some key verbs. And so, Michelle, if you would be kind of our example and look at K through 2, I'll look at 3 through 5, and then Wilson, if you will look at 6 through 8, and Rachel 9 through 12. And so what I'm looking at is for you to kind of read through the progression for your grade band that was assigned, and kind of we're going to jigsaw, so I want you to explain what the main verbs are. What do you see students doing in that grade band in the progression for this practice? And I'll give about 2 minutes to look it over. About another minute. Okay, and so K2, a lot of K through 5, what teachers typically have an obstacle with is what are my students going to do? What does planning and carrying out an investigation mean for K through 5? What exactly do we expect them to do when they're doing and engaging in this practice? And so what verbs did you find, Michelle?
For the K2 grades, the heavy verbs were observing, measuring, comparisons, predictions. It was heavy on collaboration and with guidance for for plan and
Still
conduct.
there.
Maybe I should turn my microphone on before I try to talk. Okay, well, it was so good the first time. I'll repeat it. For K2, um, I noticed observing, measuring, making comparisons, making predictions, um, and investigate, and a lot all in collaborating with each other. And then so it kind of seemed to me like to meet the plan and conduct, it's a collaborative, guided process for these grades.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, a lot of the verbs for K2 are the same as key as 3 through 5, in that it's collaboration. You're still looking to produce data, but you begin to test whenever at the bottom of that grade band, instead of kind of making predictions on experiences, as in K2, you begin to test two different models of the same proposed solution and decide which one is more likely to have success or which one meets certain parameters. And so in 6 through 8, I think that was Wilson. And just maybe send us a message if you're having some technical difficulties. All right. I'm not hearing anything, so I'm going to go ahead. But really, the big difference in 6 through 8 is that they're still working collaboratively, but then they begin to do it individually as well. And so that really shows that there could be quite a bit of difference in 6 through 8, and that maybe at the beginning of that grade band, they're still relying on each other, but by the end of 8th grade, they're starting to do things more independently. And then, Rachel, what did you find for 9-12?
Yeah, for 9-12, it continues that progression from 6-8, where I think all of them say individually or collaboratively, all the bullet points. And then it's having them do some pretty high-level stuff. Plan, test, produce data or evidence, consider variables, decide on data like the amount or precision, design solutions, select appropriate tools, and manipulate variables. It's quite a bit.
It is. And so I guess the next question to the group is that how is engaging in this practice different than performing a lab, like at the beginning of a science book, or a lab where they're following directions to get a prescribed result? Do you think that there is a difference between this practice, students engaging in it, and doing some of those activities? I'm really pushing you to talk to me since it's a PLC.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference. This requires them to be creative and really analytical at the same time, which my frustration always as a student and as a teacher is those labs are so cookie cutter, it's just like fill in the blank. So it doesn't require creativity or higher level thinking a lot of the time.
Right. And so really they're just, if you have somebody following lab procedures and there's a right answer for that lab, are they conducting and planning out an investigation, or are they obtaining, evaluating, and communicating information? It's something that I kind of go back and forth with. And not that labs are not poor practice. They have a place, or they can have a place as far as, a different goal. But if we want students to be able to really play with variables, that it needs to be something that they're either creating or manipulating in some way. And so what does that look like in K2 and in 3-5 and in 6-8 and then 9-12? I think that's kind of our big hurdle as K through 5. How do we support students to be creative or to fail forward in a way, to make sure that they're failing in a way that's going to help move them forward later and learn lessons? And then in 6 through 12, how are we supporting students to be able to engage in this practice and still get through the content that needs to be covered at that level and in that depth? And so how do we do it? Any comments about that so far?
I'm just glad that it's not set up for the cookie cutter. I think the cookie cutter one is a definite you don't get it or you get it, where if you're trying and you could retry, when you're actually acting as a scientist.
Exactly. And if it's something that you've created, you don't know what the right answer is supposed to be. You're not necessarily looking for the planned result. Whereas those canned labs, if you didn't follow the recipe correctly, then maybe you're not getting the result that you needed to get to have evidence to support something. And so it's not as organic or as engaging, perhaps. I'm trying to think of what word am I trying to go for here? I'm sure it'll come up in a little bit. And so a resource that helps me for this to really kind of nail down what does this look like is the Next Generation Science Standards screen. And did that pop up for you,
Yes.
ladies?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so this helps me in that Montana Science Standards are correlated to Next Generation Science Standards. They're modified, but each standard pretty much correlates to a Next Gen Science Standard, with the exception that we kind of left out engineering and we put in Indian Education for All, and so those are threaded in there as well. So we do have some gaps, and then we have some additions that we want to be mindful of. But with teaching Montana Science Standards with fidelity, we can really use a lot of Next Generation Science Standards materials and not have to reinvent the wheel. And so something that seems so vague for a teacher as far as practice and where we're at can be kind of defined and refined here. And so when I'm looking at this progression, all right, when I'm looking at this progression, and I'm thinking K2, 9, 12, and we've had this conversation before, but it's important to remember that we are new in this, and that all of our students in 6th grade or in 9th grade are not going to be exactly at 6th grade or exactly at 9th grade when it comes to engaging in practices, because they haven't had all of the years building up to do that. They may have had a couple of years if teachers have already begun to implement these standards, but a lot of districts are still in the phase of implementation. So really we're going to have students all over the spectrum, and we'll have some students that are able to, function and perform and engage at a really high level, and then others that need more scaffolding at their grade level, not only due to ability but due to experience. And so we're in a really kind of difficult but exciting time as well, because we can use this progression chart as a way for differentiating in our classrooms too. And so when I look at this chart and I'm looking at what these mean, sometimes getting an idea of what exactly it looks like in the classroom is nice for me personally. And the way that I do that is I correlate that to this Next Gen resource. And so I know, Rachel, you teach high school, and so are there any types of investigations that you've done, or or do you feel like you do investigations more for one grade than another? Do you want to give me a grade to search is what I'm saying? What would you prefer that I search for the grade level?
Ooh, I've got pretty much all freshmen. So 9, 12 would be fine.
Okay, but I can even go high school, and then let's see, planning and carrying out investigations. And so the thing is with high school, and this one, because I could go very specific grades on the elementary, but when I get to middle school and high school, it still does it by grade band. And I think that's because these skills are a little bit more foundational. And then here we're looking at more of an end goal. And so I can search this, and it'll show me every standard that Next Generation Science Standards has that kind of incorporates this particular practice into it, because they search by practice. I can also search by cross-cutting concept or content, so DCI. And so do any one of these grab you, Rachel?
Ooh, let's try the energy one.
Okay. I love that it's like you're shopping. It's awesome.
Yeah. I have not seen this resource before. I'm excited about it.
Hooray! And so this resource in itself is good. It breaks down the different practices and the disciplinary core ideas and cross-cutting concepts. So you really have a three-dimensional standard. And as Michelle can attest to, that's not what our standards look like in Montana. We just have this part up here in a little bit different language because it goes right into Montana rule, which means that it has to be written according to the format of the law because it goes right into law, basically. And so we don't have this kind of format available to us, and this one does, which is, it's great. And then it has some connections down here to Common Core. But my favorite part about this resource is the evidence statements over here on the right. And when I click on these evidence statements, it's going to show me not only the original standard again, but observable features for that student and what that student should be doing. And so it's almost like a beginning of a rubric and what I can use to measure students or think about what they're doing. And so let's examine this a little bit closely. And so I'm going to give you just about 30 seconds to digest this portion right here. If I can get that in there. So if you can just digest this for about 30 seconds, everybody, and then we'll kind of discuss what we think it means.
I would say you have two different temperature objects and you combine them. And then you measure your temperature before and temperature after, and you should both calculate the difference in energy and describe the difference in energy.
Okay, and so pretty specific, right? And then this assessment boundary right here, which is provided on some of the standards and is really helpful for me in a grade band where there's not necessarily a cap. I'm in the middle, I'm in 5th grade. And so it says that it's limited to investigations based on materials and tools provided to students. And so you actually give them the gamut of what they're using, and if they can design an investigation from that, and so it's not anything in the whole wide world that they might be able to come up with at some given time. And so that really narrows it down and focus just with that assessment boundary. And then the way that this is written is, for me, when I look at this, I really have to parse it out to figure out what are students doing. And so the way that I can do that without having to dissect this too much is look at the science and engineering practice, as well as the disciplinary core ideas and the cross-cutting concept. But I can scroll down to the performance assessment is basically what this is. So it's observable features by the student performance. And so what is a performance assessment? It's observing what a student is able to perform and do. And so this is saying this is what these students should be able to do. And so if you want to just kind of scan this, because I don't want to read it to you, I'm just going to go, oh, look at that. I can put everything on it at the same time. And I'll keep it still now. I don't want to read it to you. I want you to be able to just kind of look through it and talk it out. And so Michelle and Rachel and Wilson, if you're still there and would like to join in at any point, you're more than welcome to. And how is this helpful? How could it maybe help you plan a unit or a small section? How could it help you assess, build a rubric?
Chris, what was your initial question?
Oh, I had so many. That's probably... And so really it's what jumps out at you, or how could this help you with your planning, and how can it help you with assessment?
Well, the first thing that went through my head, it might not even answer a question, is how could I introduce this into the classroom to get the kids to think, and rather than just having them use a beaker of cold water, a beaker of hot water. I was thinking, okay, so, well, that's probably not high school appropriate. But I was thinking, when I get into bed, my feet are really, really cold, but I don't have to be in there long with my sweetheart, then I'm all warmed up. I don't even have to touch anybody, because that would be, but that's probably not high school appropriate. I'm sorry.
They probably love it. You have them hooked for sure.
You could just really gross them out.
It would gross them out. But I was trying to think of a fun way to introduce it.
Well, the only thing that I think of immediately, because I love place-based things, but it's definitely not a closed system, is the Yellowstone ecosystem. So you have the caldera that is up higher, and it's one of the coldest places within hundreds of miles of anywhere, even close to us, right? And then you have all of these warmer areas around it. And so how does that work? What ends up happening, and what is the effect in that? And in Livingston, the effect is a lot of wind. And so it's trying to balance out temperatures. So we get a lot of cold wind, called a katabatic wind, which is easy for us to remember because we have a brewery here named Katabatic after the wind. And so that's what I think of, but it's not a closed system as it. But it might be a good way to introduce it, and then you could say, how could you model this with other materials or create a closed system example that they had a life example. Do you have any ideas, Rachel?
I usually start this lesson. Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Yep, can.
Okay, great. My internet cut out right when you asked that question. So I usually start this lesson and concept with just asking students which way is heat transferred, hot to cold or cold to hot. And then I make them guess, and it's usually 50-50 because they don't have any idea. And I don't know, so I usually just like to start with questions and then say, okay, when you do this experiment, you'll get your answer with your data. It's not a very good real life example though.
No, but it gives them a problem to solve. It's a problem-based kind of like capsule of a mini unit, which I think is awesome. And this here is almost to me like the beginning of a rubric. Like this is meeting exactly where they need to be, and then if they're either doing these things, they're going above and beyond these things, or they're not doing these things. And to me, that's a really good measure for where a student is according to national expectations, at least when we start thinking about this. Does that make sense to you?
It also shows like the missing piece, because maybe they can hit a couple pieces and they're just weak in one area, so that you could like maybe they don't know how to well, I can think of them maybe not wanting to refine the design, but I think that it's helpful that way too. That it reminds me of the NWEA map testing, where the kids will test, but the test moves so it breaks it down to where, like if in mathematics, where if they're strong in operations or algebraic thinking, or it breaks it down, and this breaks it down into what areas that their strengths and their weaknesses are too. Yeah. Especially if you use it like a rubric, which would be handy dandy.
Yeah. And it lets you know, this is what I want them to do eventually, is refine the design, but I want them to be able to complete the standard, and these are the hoops that they're jumping through. And so perhaps these are formative assessments or performance assessments along the way to see how they're doing and help them get on track. And then my summative assessment is that they maybe they do a lab report or make a claim and have to defend it to other students, or whatever that looks like as far as the summative go. And then the other thing I was thinking about when introducing something is that when I'm looking at the key word for this, I'm really looking for thermal energy. And so something that you could do is just Google thermal energy discrepant events as well, and see if you could hook them with something that is, flashy too, and then ask them questions that way. But I really like your questioning method. I think that's
Yeah, you know what I've used too is videos of the thermal cameras. So like I found one where they had this guy in the middle of winter and it was really windy, and he had all of his layers on, and they just had him in the video, and he slowly took off each layer, and it showed like the heat draining from his hands first all the way into his core, and that helped them to see the heat transfer too. But they still couldn't get the answer just from watching the video. A lot of them couldn't take that evidence and like make meaning for themselves without interacting in a lab and getting their own data.
But that's a great real life experience. So could they, the way that you do your lab, could their summative assessment at the end be to connect it to that video and make kind of a recommendation of I don't know, like almost like how to survive winter cold, or I don't know what you would do for that, but where would you, what section of the body would you try to keep the most warm if you only had so much material, and why? Would that do it or would that not? I don't know. This is not my area of expertise.
I'm trying to think. For this specific lab, I don't know if I'd use it, but a very related, probably in the same unit, yes. Like that would be a really good real life example.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I'm going to show you kindergarten now because we looked at high school, and I think it's really good to see the whole spectrum. And then we'll kind of see how we're doing with time. We might hit a middle grade band as well. But I'm going to show you reports that my students wrote for their planning and carrying out investigations at the beginning of the year, and then a resource that I use for engineering analysis reports. And so that's kind of where we're going from this. So I'm going to close this out, and we're going to refine this search to kindergarten. What's going on? I don't want two selected. There we go. Okay. So in kindergarten, we also have energy. Might as well go in that direction. I'm just going to go straight to the evidence statement. And so you can see that we're really getting deeper with all of these concepts throughout. What you're teaching in 9-12 starts in kindergarten, ideally, and builds. And so the way that the framework is designed is to kind of take the content and make it more narrow and a lot deeper. And so a lot of the content has the same sort of themes over and over and over again with different boundaries, which is where these assessment boundaries come in as well, which makes me super hopeful that eventually we'll be doing some really cool things with these kids. Not that we're not already, we are. Mm-hmm. I'm going to scroll down just so we can see the rest of that.
Another really nice thing about the observable features is if you have any doubts to understanding the performance expectation, it's detailed.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I love the connection down here. Just sunlight and shade and patterns of warmth, hotter, warmer, colder, just connects to what Rachel was saying about 9-12 with the thermal camera.
Yeah, the observable features is so helpful because I have spent so much time looking at the performance expectation and going, okay, what exactly do they want? This, I can create any assignment using that observable features. And it reminds me of things that I'll do a lab one year and then want to improve it the next year. Oh, I should have asked about this feature, but this has it so lined out, but so much flexibility at the same time. It's really great.
Yeah, I love this resource. I really do. In kindergarten, they're doing a lot of describing. So they're given. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, when I read the observable features for the kindergarten, it's like I can imagine in my mind exactly how I would do that lesson. I can imagine the kids like collecting their data and talking and writing it on the board to discuss and having them touch their hands on grass after shining a light on it. It's really powerful.
It is. It is, but it still gives you, it still has the professionalism lie in the teacher, right? And so it's not a lesson plan. This is what the kids are going to do. You use your professional discernment to figure out how they're going to get there and what they're going to do, which I think is awesome. And so there's a lot of describing. Yeah. Go ahead, Michelle.
I was just going to share with you in the chat. I'm not sure what the first name is, but Wilson is they not only collect data, but they have to stick with it.
I like that they're talking about the purpose of the investigation. So thinking about why are we doing this? And so really thinking not only about the content, but the purpose of the practice and why do we engage in practices? Why do we investigate something? So you're getting that early on. Okay, and so with that, I think I'm going to go to 5th grade and unclick this. I'll go to 5th because that's where I am. Okay. And so we have lots of substances and engineering design, and I want to focus on engineering design a little bit just because I know that it's not in the Montana practices or not in the Montana science standards. But I don't think that teachers are not doing it. I just don't think that it's necessarily in there. And so being able to kind of pinpoint this down and what that looks like for 3 through 5. And this really gives kind of an overview of planning the investigation and what that looks like through 3 through 5. And in my district, in my building, we do engineering, and then we meet planning and carrying out investigations through another one of our standards, which is actually energy, and how the energy of the sun is transferred through the ecosystem. And so we look at leaf packs, and so how leaves fall into the stream and then macroinvertebrates colonize in a stream. And so we're really looking at riparian food webs and food webs in a river being driven by plants and sunlight. And so I wanted you to see this because we have independent variables and dependent variables and the tools. And so we do have some of this here. And so when I go to, does anybody want another minute to look at this?
That's okay.
I'm okay.
Okay. And so I'm going to go to, this is my classroom website. And I meant to scroll down earlier and I did not do that. So you'll have to just bear with me for a second. Here we go. Okay, and so what we have here is some reports from 5th graders in their macroinvertebrate colonization investigation report. And so they're required to have certain sections, and the sections, and this is their summative assessment. The sections had different criteria, kind of like what you would see in the performance assessments that we just looked at. And so this was just what worked for me at my site. And I'm going to go kind of slowly, but also not necessarily slow enough for you to read the whole thing because they're giving you background information on Fleshman Creek in Livingston. And then we have, they have the question, the independent variable, the dependent variable, and the controls. Details about placement in stream. And so what they did was they took 2 onion bags that were empty, and they decided what the variable was, and they could only do one thing. And so it was either where they put the onion bags in the stream or the substrate that they filled it with. Maybe it was different substrate, maybe it was different weight. And then they submerged those in the stream for just a couple of days. Otherwise it would take us forever to count them all. And macroinvertebrates colonize in those onion bags, and then we go and retrieve them and collect our data. And 5th graders love bugs. So he wrote out a procedure. Here's data. And we don't have colored printers in our school. So there. But these are his graphs, and they all created graphs in Excel and printed them. And then they have conclusion. And so he did this in a group. And so the group collaborated to make the investigation or to plan and carry out the investigation, but then he was responsible for his own report. And so here's another one. And I'm just going to kind of go through each one so that you can see that they're different. How dose substrate effect? Yes, they are in 5th grade. They're real. Real life students. And I'm just going to keep going. Now I'm going to go a little bit faster so that you can. And so you can tell that their questions are structured the same. And so they had support in how to structure their question, and they filled in the key words that they were focused on. And so they had support along the way. I haven't seen these in a while, so I'm like reminiscing. And if you guys have any questions, or this is from October. And so really they're in 5th grade, but they were pretty new 5th graders. Am I making you dizzy? They're learning to cite their sources. This, so it's good. We're almost done here. I just wanted to give you examples of different groups and what they look like. I think I had 6 groups altogether. October seems like a very long time ago at this point. You like this source right here? It's not going to cut it later. It was fun. Windy, very windy. So you kind of get the point of what 5th graders are able to do with some support and instruction. So they had hoops that they were jumping through for each one, and I had some performance assessments happening, and then the summative assessment at the end. And so really I had quite a bit of data from each student and each group that I could use for their grade by the end. Any questions about that?
What did you guys end up observing? Like, what were your takeaways from which environment was better for the macroinvertebrates?
They liked shade, which makes sense. And they were more likely to colonize in leaves than in rocks. And so that's what we ended up with. And then we did figure out the biotic index. She's got biotic index written here, but I don't actually see it. Maybe the next one has it, or the previous one has it. But the biotic index indicated that so we put all of the sample data together from all of the bags that were the most successful, so that they were the most prolific. And so from every group we put that together and then used that, because we have indicator species in macroinvertebrates that indicate healthy waterways and that aren't very tolerant to pollution. And so our biotic index, if I can find where one of them wrote it down, indicated that the stream was really healthy, which is great. And so here we go. Yeah. It was good. Somewhere, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So if I'm doing a engineering, so I'll look at engineering analysis reports. And so this is something that I will open up and kind of edit for my students to have an outline of what their engineering analysis reports will be as well. And the one I use is usually from Minnesota. That. Maybe I need to do a template. Oh, yeah, here it is. And so I'll give them some of these headings of what they need to do, right? And so problem scope, but I'll really parse it down and make it very simple and tell them exactly what they need to put in the outline that I give to them. And so they're giving me, and they love that people at the University of Minnesota who are engineers, who are going to school for engineers, do the same thing, although it's very, very, very scaled down. But I think that you can take this and really adjust it for any grade level, depending on what that looks like, even if it's in kindergarten and it's describe why and describe, and you're kind of doing that together. I think that you would have some writing opportunities there as well. And so, any questions about that whole chunk of me talking and hardly anybody else talking?